Before we begin, this video was suggested by a friend in the Koopa Troop Discord server. An invite to the server is in the description of every video. Thank you. Hey everyone, it's the Koopa Man. I've been thinking lately about how all stories are like, well, Lego sets, all made from the same bricks. These bricks are what we call tropes. And no, unlike what some certain snake oil saleswoman on the left will have you believe, they aren't a conspiracy against women. Especially not in video games. Tropes are, according to TV Tropes and Merriam-Webster, a conceptual figure of speech used in storytelling to identify certain themes, cliches, and, well, literary tools. Hence the phrase on TV Tropes that tropes are tools. And like any tool, it all depends on how you use it. Take for instance the trope of a sympathetic villain. I talked about that before in a video. While nowadays the trope is being used poorly, such as with the movies Cruella and Maleficent, you can do it correctly, like with Mr. Freeze in the Batman animated series episode Heart of Ice. The idea lately that some tropes are inherently bad, or even more stupidly, morally wrong, is a completely asinine idea for that reason. It all boils down to all stories coming from 7 basic plots. 1. Overcoming the monster, where a hero has to defeat an overwhelming force or foe. 2. Rags to riches, where a character rises up from poverty, sometimes loses it, but learns a lesson if they do. 3. The quest, where a hero has to take a journey to a destination or to find an object. 4. The voyage and return, basically the quest but with a round-trip ticket. Think to there and back again. 5. Comedy, which is sort of self-explanatory. It's a story made to make you laugh. 6. Tragedy. Again, self-explanatory, a story made to make you cry or feel pity for the protagonist. And 7. Rebirth, which is like the tragedy, but with a happier ending. In addition, most of these story archetypes can be structured into a 3-act structure known as the hero's journey or the monomyth, which basically encompasses a lot of the first 4 plots I listed, but with a steady structure as demonstrated by this image. A rising action, climax, and falling action. Those basic plots make up the foundation of any story, and the 3-act structure monomyth makes up the supporting structure of most of them. All the rest of the construction from there are what we call tropes. Various little creative tricks and themes we use to make our stories in a way that makes them compelling to the human experience. Sure, like I said before, it's all in how the tropes are used as tools. Like with building a house, even if you have a solid frame and foundation, it can still fall apart if your carpenter is a heavy drinker and just hammers away randomly. As the TV trope page says, all tropes can be written badly or overused. In that case, certain tropes run the risk of becoming, to use the term, cliché. However, even cliches have their purposes. In a sense, all a cliche is a regularly used trope, and if used properly it can be an effective tool of storytelling, but runs the greater risk of audience eye-rolling. To go off the TV Tropes are tools page, tropes are not bad, even ones you don't like. As I said, they aren't a conspiracy against women, but instead a writing tool to get across ideas and make your stories more interesting. If you have issues with certain tropes, that's a you problem. It's not a problem with the trope. Many tropes have reasons to exist. Damsel in distress resonates with men's desire to protect and women's desire to be protected, which is evolutionary and instinctual. The chosen one and prophecy tropes speak to us culturally as Westerners, as the Judeo-Christian foretelling of the coming of the Christ is as old as Western civilization itself. Even a deus ex machina can be used effectively, mostly for satirical and comedic purposes, sure, but still. There is also the case that some tropes do get used frequently and often to become cliches. There is nothing new under the sun, after all. Art imitates life, and because people by and large are sort of predictable, with people in stories being even more so, just because you see a trope often doesn't automatically make it bad. Stories are, like we established, built from the same foundations and using the same basic parts. Then there's the need to be quote-unquote realistic we see in some media these days. That's never really necessarily a bad thing, but, I mean, why would people like Zack Snyder want to make Superman realistic? The man can fly and shoot lasers out of his eyes. Making him snap necks doesn't make him realistic, it makes you into an asshole. Tropes also aren't necessarily good. It all depends on the writer. Even a really cool and fun idea can be ruined by terrible writing. RWBY is proof of this. So is Man of Steel. There are also the movements to deconstruct and subvert certain tropes and plots that come around every time a certain group of so-called artists think themselves to be better than everyone who came before them. The problem with deconstruction and subversion is when you take things apart with no intent to rebuild afterwards, it isn't just deconstruction. its destruction. For example, if you write a deconstruction of superhero stories where everyone is morally gray, don't be surprised when the audiences all attach themselves to the most morally pure character, even if you intended for that character to be quote-unquote wrong. This is exactly what happened with Rorschach and Alan Moore's Watchmen, and because Alan Moore is an idiot anarchist, he cannot understand why. The reason, however, is simple. Watchmen is still a story about heroes. The readers will still side with the most morally heroic character in the end. And in this case, it's the character who believes that genocide is bad. And no, I'm not being hyperbolic. Alan Moore thinks that killing millions of Americans to preserve the integrity of the USSR, to stop the Cold War from going hot, is totally acceptable. Huh, funny. I thought anarchists hated big government. Why is he stumping for a socialist dictatorship? Anyway, deconstruction on its own is a topic dense enough for its own video, and don't worry, it's on my list somewhere. And then there's the craze of, quote, subverting expectations. This too has been used poorly, mostly because current writers are, well, idiots. Rian Johnson is an idiot. To reveal that Rey is not all that special as a subversion is just stupid, but to reveal that the big bad of the Empire, Darth friggin' Vader, was the father of the series protagonist Luke Skywalker, that is how you subvert expectations. And that's why that moment is always going to be remembered in pop culture history, while people already sort of forgot about Rey Palpatine Skywalker. Subverting expectations, too, is a trope that can either be used good or poorly. In fact, a lot of the humor from the golden era of The Simpsons used this trope masterfully. Take, for example, this scene.
Okay. Milhouse's grandmother lives on 257th Street, and I'm on 3rd. No. Well, finally, a little luck.
I believe I saw a breakdown of this scene somewhere before, but I can't for the life of me find it. But you don't need to be a literary expert to know that this scene has layers to it of subverted expectation, used masterfully to make a very absurd yet hilarious joke. What it comes down to, though, at the end of the day, is that with subversion, deconstruction, stories, and tropes in general, is that it's not the fault of the tropes. They're just the parts. The problem is with the writers. Any trope can be used well, even deconstruction and subversion, just as any trope can be used poorly. It all comes down to the skill and competency of the writer and storyteller. The reason we're seeing more tropes and cliches these days being annoying is because the current generation of writers aren't as good as the ones who came before them. This is primarily because a lot of them dismiss all those who came before, attacking the giants whose shoulders they stand upon because their professors told them they're all special, unique snowflakes, and anyone who came before them were big bad racists. Yeah, this is a political issue, sort of. But regardless, instead of blaming the trope or cliche, instead you should be blaming the storyteller. The trope itself is neutral. It's like the argument with firearm regulation, which is also a leftist talking point like trope regulation. The issue isn't the tool, it's the person using the tool, and the person using the tool is sometimes a tool. Clever wordplay, ain't it? That'll be it for today. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe as it helps me with the YouTube algorithm. This request itself has become a trope that, knowing my skills, is probably being used poorly. If you want to list other examples of tropes being criticized, please feel free to discuss it in the comments. And until next time, game on.